Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, the show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership, and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's show, we've got John Shively, who's the CEO of Pebble Partnership, who's going to discuss what is widely regarded as one of the most scrutinised and controversial mining projects in the world. John has spent decades working in Alaska, from his early career through to senior public service roles, and obviously into leadership positions in some of the state's most significant mining operations. And today he leads a project that sits at the intersection of technical, feasibility, environmental, community engagement, and shifting political realities. And in today's conversation, we're going to go sort of beyond those kind of headlines, and we're going to talk about what the mining industry still misunderstands about Pebble from a technical and operational standpoint, how engagement with Alaska Native corporations and obviously communities has evolved over time, and what's it really like to lead a project where engine solutions and political outcomes don't always align. We're also going to explore design decisions that's challenged the sort of common perceptions of large-scale Arctic mining, the real risk and reward trade-offs as seen through an engineer's lens, and the broader implications Pebble has for copper supply, critical minerals, and the future of mining credibility across North America. And we're also going to speak about, obviously, John's going to share some of his personal reflections on leadership, especially when under pressure, obviously his resilience in the face of prolonged uncertainty, and what he would say to the next generation of mining professionals considering a career in our industry and working in obviously the political sound and obviously the complexity around that. So with no further ado, let's welcome John to the podcast. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing great, Rob. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate your time coming on the podcast. So, as I've just mentioned in the introduction, obviously you've got a long and distinguished career. I just wonder if you can just tell us a little, obviously tell our audience a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, how your career sort of developed from back in the day to the present. And our audience actually likes this part of the podcast because they get to know the guest, and sometimes they may learn from a person's journey, especially if maybe a mine engineer or geologist is listening to this, how someone's career has developed. So I'll hand it over to you now.
Sure. Well, I was raised on the East Coast of the United States, went to school at the University of North Carolina, and got what I call a pathetic degree in political science. It has no redeeming value that I've ever found. Came to Alaska in 1965, right after I graduated, as a Vista volunteer, just like the Peace Corps, to work with Alaska Native people. I've worked in a number of organizations that were designed to help or owned by Alaska Natives in my career. We'll get back to that in a bit. Served a couple terms in government, one as a chief of staff to a governor, and the other as a commissioner of natural resources for the state. And I guess, obviously with a degree in political science, I don't have the technical background of many people that leave the mining companies. I'd like to think I have some management skills, which is how I ended up here. The couple times that I was involved in mining, certainly with the as a commissioner of natural resources, mining on state lands was part of my responsibility, so I did it there. But the big thing is that in my career, I worked for NANA Regional Corporation. Now in Alaska, the land settlement went to corporations owned by Alaska Natives. So NANA, NANA was one of those. We ended up with a very impressive zinc lead prospect known as Red Dog, which I think most people in the mining industry have heard of. It's one of the largest zinc lead mines in the world. And so that was my first real experience, because I worked as a senior vice president at NANA when we did the negotiations, well, eventually with Cominco to put the deal together and then watch them to develop the land. And then, as I think most people in the industry know, Cominco was eventually bought by Teck, who's still mining Red Dog. So, and then I got recruited in 2008 to come to Pebble. I was actually in the cruise industry at the time. And I knew it was a controversial project, and there were two partners: Northern Dynasty, small junior, out of Vancouver, and Anglo American, of course, a major international mining firm. And when they recruited me, I told them, "Look, I don't know whether this project can be done environmentally responsibly or not. So if you want a cheerleader, find somebody else." They hired me anyway, so. Uh, but, in that time, and even starting before I came on in 2008, we've spent a total of over $200 million just on environmental studies. And we have an environmental impact statement, which is part of the U.S. Uh, permitting process that says we can do the project. And I'm very much convinced that we can. I mean, the Bristol Bay region where we are in Southwest Alaska is the home of the world's largest sockeye fishery. So it is sensitive. But our environmental impact statement, which was run through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, says we can do the project without harming the fish. And so, but it's very political. I mean, I've been involved in political issues throughout my career of different kinds, particularly in the Native community. I mean, I was around actually when the Native community was fighting for their land rights and was involved somewhat in that. And then when the settlement came through, implementing that settlement. So, um, I, I have some experience in, controversial issues. What's bothered me sort of about where we are with Pebble is that the environmental community is not held to any standards in terms of truth. They publicly say we will destroy the fishery, not that we might, not that we could, that we will, which is impossible. One of the reasons is there are 8 watersheds in the Bristol Bay region. We potentially impact 2, so it would be hard to jump into the other. And so, but it's a national, if not an international issue. Certainly, when Anglo American was involved, people would come to the AGM and annual general meetings, to protest Pebble. And it basically is a partisan political issue. Republicans in general, although not totally, are support of projects like Pebble. The Democrats generally, but not always, are not. Anyway, that sort of gets you up to date to where I am.
Yes, certainly. Obviously, you've called Pebble one of the most scrutinised mining projects in the world. What are I suppose, the hardest technical and operational facts about the deposit? And then obviously looking at tailings and obviously tailings design, the site layout, that you think the broader community still misunderstands, and also where do you believe your team has actually improved on standards in the Arctic practice?
Well, I think at a couple of, and we can start with tailings. I mean, we've designed a tailings impoundment facility that's sort of unique. As you know, usually on the tailings impoundment facility, you have unless you're doing dry stack, which doesn't really work for us because of the environment. But you have the tailings, and then you have water on top, and a lot of the problems with tailing dam failures has been because of the moisture. So our design basically has the liquid drain through the tailings and it comes out in front of the tailings impoundment facility, and then we put that into the water treatment system. So, the first thing is that if there would to be a failure, the tailings wouldn't run the way that they do have in some other of the tailings impoundment facilities. The design basically is and I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to do well with some of the terms here. But basically, we have, the impoundment facility, uh, and then we put steps in front of it to support it. So, and that's not a unique design to us, but I think um, the way we've done it it provides more protection. And one of the reasons is that, we are in a seismic area, so we've looked at what the seismic event potential is, and then over design for that. Now, we still have to get that design approved by the state of Alaska that does design. Then we have separated out the peritic tailing. So um, the the regular sort of non-toxic tailings will be handled as I just explained, and then the peritic tailings will go into a separate impoundment facility that's lined, and that has to be covered with waters, otherwise you get acid if you get air and water mixing with peritic tailings. In the end, the peritic tailings would go back into the pit. We have a water treatment system that is as good as anything that anyone's doing in the world. We have several different trains that we have to send the water through to get it clean before we can put it out into the system. So we won't have a mixing zone. In some places, basically, there are zones where the discharge can mix with the natural water, and basically, that can help take care of what the impacts might be. But for us, we don't want to do that. The one question, so we can release water when it's needed into the system. That's particularly useful if they get a dry summer and some of the streams start to lose water, which means they start losing fish habitat. So we can do that. So those were some of the mining is pretty straightforward. We start with an open pit. The prospect itself probably is 80 years or more of resource. The first tranche of that we're looking at is about a 20-year mine, and then we'd have to come back and permit the next tranche.
Looking back at your work on Red Dog and obviously now Pebble, what did you get wrong, I suppose, early in your career about partnering with the Alaska Native Corporation, obviously, and communities? And how has that shaped the way that you, I suppose, now structure equity, jobs, and government conversations around Pebble in Bristol Bay?
Well, I mean, actually, we had the leverage in Red Dog because we owned the land, the Native Corporation. So, and the agreement we came to has been very lucrative. And not only that, in Alaska, under the land settlement, the mining revenues from Red Dog go not only to NANA, but to every one of the 12 regional corporations and 200 plus village corporations in the state. So it's had a tremendous impact. I think they've distributed over $2 billion so far over the life of the mine. And we did some things there that were unique. We had a management committee between NANA, the senior people at NANA and the senior people at that time at Kamenko that met at least 3 times a year, that allowed us to address issues when they came up, including one time when there was some serious acid mine drainage that had not been anticipated. And there, we put in agreements of preferential Alaska Native shareholder hire. So there were what's always been over 50% Alaska Native hire at that mine, which is, unique in Alaska in terms of Native hire programs. And we had a Native contracting provision, does contracting. So NANA does a lot like the food service. They have a joint venture for trucking and things like that. So we had a subsistence advisory council, because subsistence resources, of course, key to Alaska Native, how they live in rural Alaska. And so all of those things, I think, NANA was able to get in because they were the landowner. That I brought that background to Pebble. And to be frank, I mean, the reason I took the Pebble job on was because I know having seen what has happened up in the Red Dog area, the Red Dog itself is north of the Arctic Circle, but it allowed that area to form their own regional government. That's money. There's money for schools, for the community. There've been jobs, as I mentioned. So that was sort of my focus. I mean, other people uh, as used to say, were interested in the world supply of copper. That when I first started, that was not an issue for me. Actually, it is now, and I know we'll get to that later. When we were at the height of our exploration program, spending $80 million a year, well, we were doing a lot of native contracting. We had at one point over 180 local people working on the exploration project. We allowed some of the smaller native corporations to start to build business expertise, which they have continued to use, even though our exploration program is basically on hold right now as we wait to deal with the permitting issue. We developed an elders conference to come in once a year, and an elders advisory group, something that I learned from the Nana region, because native elders are important in decision making. So there were a number of those things that we did. We have some ongoing relationships, land relationships with a couple of the native corporations that are closest to us. We continue to have a small workforce. There are like 9 of us now permanently, but over half of them are Alaska Native.
Pebble has been through multiple federal and state permitting pivots, ESI work, and political reversals. From the inside, what does it really feel like to manage a project where obviously the technical answer says it can be built, but the political answer keeps shifting from under your feet? How do you lead a team through all that kind of chaos?
Well, you have to have a little bit of patience. I mean, I guess it's been disappointing. I mean, the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our criticism of us has been designed to actually terrorize people in the local area to think that they're going to lose their fishery, which is just untrue. Federal government people have been involved in that, in being dishonest with us in terms of what they were doing, hiding things from us that they were doing with the environmental community. And having worked in government, although not the federal government, I find that to be very discouraging. I guess what you have to do in that kind of situation is you have to believe in the product and what it can do, and that's what keeps me going, and that's what I think keeps the other people that work here going. That this is a life-changing project for that area. Right? It will allow people to have jobs where jobs don't exist today. It will provide money for the local government. It will provide money for the state government, and of course, that actually has huge economic implications for the country, because if we operate the mine, Alaska doesn't produce any of the things that you need to run a mine, whether it's steer balls or turbines or anything else. So we'll have a national impact on the economy. So I mean, for me, it's been uh, an interesting journey. I became CEO first in 2008, served until 2013, and then I sort of half retired and became chairman of the board, and they brought in a new CEO. He in 2020 had to resign as a result of some comments he made about the state's political leadership. They brought me back then for what I thought was going to be 2 or 3 months. It's been slightly longer, but again, I stay. I'm 82, so at some point I ought to cut back. But I stay because I know what this project can do for people, and that's really what keeps me going. And I know, actually, as we get into what the metal itself, how important it is to the country, that's now another reason that clearly things have changed in terms of what people think we need for copper, particularly. So,
Yeah. On the ground, what are the most important design and operating decisions you've had to make separate Pebble from the stereotype of a large greenfield open pit near sensitive fisheries, for example? Obviously, entailing the storage configuration, water management, closure planning, obviously pipelines, roads routing. Which of those would you defend, even if it cost you your MPV?
I think tailings has to be number one. I mean, you've got to have secure tailings impoundment facility. I mean, that's because that's potentially where the most damage can come from. So tailings management is first. Water management is second. We've designed a large water storage uh, impoundment facility so that we can store, if we get really excess precipitation. We actually have very good information on precipitation over the last 70 years because in the community of Iliamna, which is 17 miles away, they've been keeping climate information for that long. So we can extrapolate that. So those are the first two things. Road design is important, but it's more of an operational issue. It's dust control, and things like that. But right now, we intend to have a gas pipeline. It's pretty standard uh, uh, design, so I don't think there's a lot of risk there. And closure. It's going to be interesting. I mean, as I said earlier, right now we're looking at a mine project that would run around 20 years or so, and we will have to have a closure plan for that. But it is a project that has potential to go on longer than that, and how you manage it, how people manage that in the long run is going to be an issue. And again, it's going to come down to tailings impoundment, as I think what you do with the tailings that you get. Um, a lot of people have said they'd prefer us to go underground. The prospect, really, we split into what we call Pebble East and Pebble West. Pebble West is where we're starting. It has very low stripping ratio, so it really helps the economics to do that open pit. The Pebble East, which goes, starts at about 1,000 feet, I think, below the surface. It could certainly be mined underground using block cave technology, but even figuring out whether you can do block cave is very expensive. I mean, it's $1 billion probably just to get down and look at it, and it's a whole separate permitting system. So, although I think at some point in the long run, part of Pebble will be underground. Where we're starting mining, it doesn't make any sense.
Critics say no to Pebble Mine because of Bristol Bay and obviously the salmon. But supporters say Pebble is a strategic copper and critical mineral asset for North America. If you had to speak directly to skeptical miners and engineers, and obviously not necessarily politicians, how would you lay out the risk reward trade off from an honest opinion, including where you still see real residue risk?
Well, I mean, whenever you're in mining, the biggest risk is price. So today that price looks pretty good. When I was first came on as CEO, Anglo and American and Northern Dynasty would debate what price that we should use to look at the economics, and it varied from $1.80 to two and a quarter. Well, we're way above that, but that's there. I think how China deals with the market, which also it relates to price, it is a risk for any mine. Now, uh, you know, could the tailings impoundment facility fail? Is that a risk? It is a risk. I mean, we can't 100% guarantee, but we're pretty much 100% guaranteed that that's not going to fail and do. And even if it does, I do not believe it would do permanent damage. I mean, that area went through a major volcanic event back at the beginning of the last century, and which was put toxic dirt all over that region, and the salmon survived that. So I don't really see a risk to the salmon. Um, and then, the other risk you have if you get into mining is, right now we know what copper is used for. We have an idea of what's happening in the market, which is the supply is about to not keep up with demand. At least if you look at the S&P Global study they just finished, which think by 2040, we're going to need a 50% increase in the world is producing now. That a lot of good way to see how you get there, to be perfectly frank. But, does something else come up that substitutes for copper? I don't know. I don't think, but I think the market's going to be there. I mean, most of what's happening now in the world is electricity. I mean, whatever, because whether it's robots, EVs, um, solar panels, wind turbines, data centers, growth of third world economies, increase in defense spending, all of those. Uh, Electricity is a basic component of how things run. And if you have electricity, you need copper. And so to me, the market's there. And I think the risk right now isn't so much to a mine that gets started. The risk is to the country as to whether or not we will have the capacity to supply the metals that we need. And it also gets very tricky, as you know. I mean, mining, for political science guys, pretty simple. You blow up the rock, put it in a mill, make some concentrate, and then the concentrate gets shipped somewhere and made into metal. Well, obviously, the first two things happen at the mine almost always, particularly for base metals. But the processing does not. And one of the places that the U.S. has fallen behind is processing. I mean, we haven't had a new base metal processing plant in this country, I think, for 5, 6, 7 decades. We've had some expansions of existing ones. The people who saw this coming some time ago, obviously, are the Chinese, and now process about 40 to 50% of the world's copper. So if our country wants to be independent on copper, we're going to have to look at processing. And because of the way the Chinese work, which is they have a much different system than ours, they have a much uh, stricter control over the economy. And so, if you take something like copper, they have the whole supply chain. They cut the deal with mines, they concentrate, they take it to China, they smelt it, get the metal, they put the metal into EVs, refrigerators, whatever. So in that case, they don't have to make money in every step in the supply chain. So right now, what they're doing is they're basically giving away the processing for free. So if you want to put a processing plant up in the U.S., how do you compete with that? No, I mean that's the kind of place that the government, I think, does have a role to play. And if the U.S. wants to get to processing, which is how you really do secure your supply of metals, then they're going to have to figure out a way to help with that.
Permitting and stakeholder engagement at Pebble sits at the intersection of obviously federal, state, and tribal authority. What have you learned about building credibility with these agencies? Also, obviously, the tribes, local communities, when past leadership missteps and Pebble taps have, and obviously damaging the trust. How does one repair that trust, and what does it really look like in practice?
Well, you repair it, by continuing to work with people and educating people as to what the project can do, and that's a time-consuming and expensive process. But we were making pretty good progress there, I think, before Anglo pulled out in 2012. And the way we were doing it were two things. We had a very active program locally with local people that were going around holding community meetings, telling people what the project was like. But to me, the bigger piece was the Elders Conference, which as I mentioned, I started shortly after I came on as CEO in 2008. And it was interesting. The first meeting we had was very contentious. There has to be translation. Having worked a lot on the Native community in my career, I knew that, the way you do that is you give, 5, 6 sentences at most and let them translate. Well, I would give the 5 or 6 sentences. The translation would take 20 minutes. So I knew there was something going on that I wasn't understanding. The last elders conference we had in 2012, we had about, I think, 200 elders, and it was a whole different situation. I mean, people were interested, they were engaged, and they were talking about the issues that their villages have. I mean, because there are no economic opportunities, lots of people are moving out of villages. And in Alaska, in order to have a school, you have to have at least 10 students. Well, at least maybe 4 schools now in that region have shut down because they don't have enough students. And the elders were watching as the village populations were either more or less stable, but many of them declining. The ones that were stable despite the fact that births were greater than deaths. So you were getting an out migration no matter what. And so I think, and that's sort of what happened at Red Dog. I mean, when we started out talking about Red Dog, we knew the people in the region weren't particularly interested in mining. So we had to persuade them that it could be done, and their biggest interest was protect subsistence. And actually, in the Red Dog Agreement we got, NANA has the right to shut the mine down if they believe it's threatening subsistence resources, which is I think probably unique, for a non-government agency, a unique power to have virtually anywhere in the world. So I do think that we did gain some of the trust. There are some political issues in the region. So you've got 2 things. One, you've got the fact that people are out there saying we're going to kill all the fish, and that terrifies people, and I understand that. It's wrong. It's a lie, but people are going to be concerned, and they don't have a lot out there. So we have to deal with that, and then we have to assure people that there are some economic benefit for them. One of the things we are doing is we have something called the Pebble Fund, and so we've set aside 3% of the revenues to give to individuals out there to share, so that there's some local sharing uh, of the benefits. Not just the fact that their government gets money and some of their native corporations will get money because they'll be doing work for us, but that individuals that live in the region can get some direct economic benefit.
From a macro and strategic standpoint, how do you weigh the role of Pebble in long-term copper supply and also US energy transition, and friendshoring of critical minerals against the reality of, against the reality that one controversial project can influence public and investor sentiment towards the entire mining sector in North America?
Well, clearly we can play a major role. I think we can provide up to, I think, 13, 14% of what the nation needs for copper. And we have rhenium and gold and molybdenum and silver and other things, which are also important um, uh, minerals for the country. Um, so, again, if we can figure out the processing piece, and we're looking at hydrometallurgical processing, different from the smelter, and that's a technology that's not new, but it's not been used a lot in terms of making metal. But there's a major plant in Newfoundland now, and a nickel mine, and the we've looked at like 13 or 14 different technologies that work around. They use more the use of liquids and heat and pressure to make the um, metal rather than just the heat that you do with smelting. So, we can play that role, and the country's going to need it. They're going to get it from somewhere. I mean, my guess is the question is where and at what cost, and whether or not, the country's having to deal with, the Chinese, one day saying, well, here's the copper, and the next day saying, no, we're keeping the copper for ourselves. So to me, putting that all together for us and for other potentially large mines in the country, like Resolution, is pretty essential to our economic future.
Yeah. And lastly, on a more personal level, and obviously working decades in Alaska, from Vista volunteer to State and Natural Resources Commissioner to leading obviously Pebble, what has this particular project taught you about resilience and leadership, and obviously being under pressure? And what would you say to any, I suppose, privately, not necessarily to common, to young sort of mining professionals thinking about joining a project that, I suppose, that is really this controversial and politically radioactive?
Well, I mean, several things. I mean, first of all, if anybody had told me in 1965 when I came to Alaska with my pathetic political science degree that I'd be CEO of one of the largest potential copper mines in the world, I would have told them they were crazy. But what's been fascinating to me, both in my experience with Red Dog and my experience here, is how underrated the mining industry is. People don't understand it. They don't like it. A lot of people, if it's there, and I agree that, if you're a mining engineer, an open pit is pretty. If you're not a mining engineer, but maybe not so much. But, nothing runs without mining. And I think for people who are looking at that's the things that to me is so exciting. I mean, you're going to provide things that are absolutely essential if we're going to have the kind of standard of living that we have in this country and that countries around the world, particularly third world countries, would like to get to. And none of that happens without minerals. So, and the compensation is pretty decent. So, I mean, I think it's an incredible industry, and there are incredible opportunities. I mean, because the country has sort of ignored mining for, at least, half a dozen decades or more, the mining schools have closed, or mining programs and different colleges have closed. So, and, people are getting older like me. So there's opportunity there. There's great opportunity in the industry. Now, in terms of, how do you deal with some of the controversy and things like that? You have to sort of step back. You can't take things personally. I mean, my opinion has been, because Alaska is a small state in population and only 700,000 of us that live up here, that you cannot make things personal. You can disagree with somebody, but a year later you may be working with that same person on a different project or a different issue. So I think that's the thing. The other thing, you got to listen. Even though I know that, have a strong feeling this is a great project, it's important for me to listen to people who think otherwise. Now, I'd love to be able to have a decent conversation within the environmental community, but that doesn't take place. But in terms, particularly dealing with local people and government people, you just need to sort of step back when things sort of start to spiral out of control and say, look, where do we want to go in the long run? And, how do we get there? And generally, you don't get there by trying to attack people individually. But that doesn't mean you don't fight back. I mean, which is sort of what I'm doing here, which is telling people, why this is an important project, and why I believe it.
Yeah. John, really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story. Obviously, telling us about the Pebble Partnership and the Pebble Mine. And obviously, you mentioned earlier your age, and 82, and you're still going. You're still fighting, and still you believe in the project, and that's a testimony to yourself in being persistent. And I really appreciate you sharing your story. And hopefully, you can come on again on the podcast, and maybe we can speak about something else around, and maybe educate some of the younger listeners, maybe some of the challenges that you may have faced, but going into a little bit more detail where you can share some of your experiences, life experiences, and how you've become so resilient in a difficult mining environment, because mining isn't easy and you've got a project in front of you that is difficult. So really appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing our story. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got questions, are you on any social media channels, and how can people get in contact with you?
LinkedIn is the one I use most, but they can also pull up Pebble Partnership in a search engine, and our webpage will come up, and we can get contact with that. And,
Yeah.
in answer to your question, yeah, I'd be happy to come back. I really appreciate the time you've given me now, and if there things change, or if if there are some things you'd like to go in more depth, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, certainly. I'll reach out to you, and we can record a podcast later this year around another topic. But yeah, more than welcome to come back on.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you. Well, thank you again, and all the best for the remainder of the year.
all right. Well,
Yeah,
you too. It was great to be on. Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. What a great story John has just shared with us, and being resilient in an industry that is difficult, let alone having a very difficult project that John is working on at the moment. But I suppose persistence and resilience is what the mining industry is all about, to get a lot of these projects from early stage exploration into production, and testament for John in his persistence and his pursuit to make this project work. So a great episode to share amongst people within our mining industry, wherever you are in the world. And there's going to be obviously a lot of lessons that can be learned from listening to this episode. So thank you again for listening, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.